This is Down the Aisle Wrestling Podcast, where we only make one promise. We will always reach for that.
That's really.
With Robbie Mack and Kevin Laramie. Here's Kevin Laramie. And welcome to Down the Aisle Wrestling Podcast. Today, Rob, we had a great conversation with Dave Simon of TSN Radio, right?
Yeah, Dave was really gracious to come on and join us. He's a really busy guy. He has his own show in Montreal, like you said, Kevin, and he runs the Ringside Report website. He's a busy guy, and he took about 15-20 minutes just to chat wrestling. We talked about Wrestlemania. We talked about Fastlane. We even talked a little bit about Chris Benoit and Seth Rollins' penis.
Yeah, we did talk about Seth Rollins' penis, and that is something that will be remembered forever.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't unsee it, Kevin.
Well, I haven't seen it yet, so I'm just fine and dandy. And without further ado, here's Dave.
Well, Dave, hold on. Before you go to the interview, Kevin, Dave and I have seen it, so I think you need to join the Seen Seth Rollins Penis Club.
Fine, I'll join the club. Yeah, those are words I've said too many times. Without further ado, Dave Simon.
Do women know about shrinkage?
What do you mean, like laundry?
No.
Like when a man goes swimming afterwards?
It shrinks?
Like a frightened turtle.
And welcome back to Down the Aisle Wrestling Podcast. It's with great pleasure that I would like to welcome to the show a man that I listen to about twice a week on TSN Radio in Montreal, Mr. Dave Simon, host of Wrestling Uncensored and Ringside Report on TSN Radio. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
It's really our pleasure. To start the show, the interview, just can you explain us how you first fell in love with wrestling at the beginning?
Well, that's a great question. I can remember it, which is pretty crazy. I don't have a lot of memories from the time I was about 4 years old, but I was 4, maybe 5 years old, and I distinctly remember being on my parents' bed, flipping the channels on one of those big remote controls, and I stopped when I saw this huge, muscular, tanned guy ripping his shirt off, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was like a superhero come to life, and it was Hulk Hogan, and I was pretty much hooked from then on. So it's been almost 25, 26 years at this point. I've been a wrestling fan, and I was a little Hulkamaniac. It was the Hulkster that brought me in the late 80s and early 90s.
All right, we're all around the same age, me being 30 as well, and Rob being a little older than 33. So we all grew up with the same type of environment, the wrestling environment, the 80s,
Yeah.
and then the Attitude Era. What's the one souvenir, what's the one moment that you were the proudest to be a wrestling fan, that you think about and you still have chills thinking about that moment?
Wow, that's a good question. You know, I think that there are a lot of moments I've had where I was proud to be a wrestling fan. Even last year, WrestleMania 30, seeing Daniel Bryan hoist those 2 championship belts up made me proud to be a wrestling fan, to see that moment. Bret Hart losing to Owen Hart at WrestleMania 10 and then winning the title from Yokozuna later that night. I thought that was a beautiful moment, seeing Bret become champion that night but still losing to his younger brother in the opening contest. I'm a big fan of the Hart, so that definitely touched me. And, you know, obviously we see it differently a little bit now with what happened with Chris Benoit, but I do remember distinctly WrestleMania 20, seeing Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit finally become world champion and hugging each other at the end of WrestleMania 20. I thought that was a really beautiful moment when, you know, Eddie was WWE champion and Chris just beat Shawn Michaels and Triple H to become world heavyweight champion. They'd worked so hard to get there, and it's sad now to look back, but at the time it was a really great moment.
Dave, I don't get your show on TSN Radio out here. I'm from Ontario, close to Toronto, but I do subscribe to the Ringside Report podcast. And before I kind of get into the question that I wanted to ask you, you kind of brought something up. And how do you feel when you watch a Chris Benoit match now? Do you find it odd? Do you kind of try to look past the last part of his life and try to focus on what Chris Benoit really was an awesome wrestler?
You know, it's hard for me to watch Chris Benoit matches. I haven't really watched much of Benoit since he died and everything that happened there. It's hard for me to watch Benoit matches. I was such a fan of his work. I'm really a fan of that style of wrestling, the hard-hitting, really good technical ability, guys that go in there and make it look real. And I'm sure you guys remember he had that 4 reel on the side of his trunks for a long time. And I believed in Chris Benoit, but it's hard to watch now because of that style, because it was so violent and so hard-hitting. They called him the Rabid Wolverine. He was so just ruthless and violent, and to see that in his eyes, it just puts it in a different light. And it's really hard to watch Chris Benoit matches now. As much as I loved him, it's hard to watch at this point, and I try not to.
And it's funny that you bring that up, Dave, because if I go back and watch something on a network, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Chris Benoit, and I was kind of a guy who, once the Attitude Era ended and once we kind of got in the PGA era, I kind of longed for something previous. But, you go back and you watch some of these guys taking unprotected chair shots, knowing what we know now, like, I'm glad that these guys don't have to subject themselves to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some truth in it. At the same time, I have a hard time watching guys swing chairs and never aim for the head. Mm-hmm. If you really are trying to hurt your opponent, if you're really trying to maintain that illusion, I'm not saying take 15 chair shots like Rock and Mankind at the Rumble, but I am saying once in a while, you got to take a shot to the head. It doesn't have to be the most vicious shot to the head. I know you guys must remember the shot that Ken Shamrock took on his knees from The Rock that one time on Raw.
Yeah,
that was disgusting. Yeah. Right? You guys know what I'm talking about. But I don't think you need to see that all the time. But once in a while, I want somebody to take a chair shot to the head. I want to see blood every now and again, because if it is supposed to be a fight, there should be some scars at the end of the day.
And it tells a good story, and it's not just blood for the sake of having blood. Think how many matches use blood to tell a good story. Dave, I heard your interview with Shawn Michaels that you conducted, and I thought you did a phenomenal job. Cool. And I'll tell you why. Because you and I kind of share the same thing for Shawn Michaels. You mentioned to him that when growing up, your 18-year-old self hated Shawn Michaels. I hated Shawn Michaels growing up. I hated his babyface run. I hated him with Degeneration X. But over the last few years, I've learned to respect Shawn Michaels, and I've actually become a fan of Shawn Michaels. What was your point where you're like, you know what? I'm going to put my hatred of Shawn Michaels aside. What was your point that you've seen Shawn Michaels and you're like, you know what? I'm a fan.
I think it was his last run. I think the build-up to his match with John Cena at WrestleMania, I was really behind Shawn. I wanted Shawn to beat Cena. He wasn't supposed to be in that spot, and he managed to get in there somehow. I think there was an injury. I forget who was supposed to wrestle Cena that year, but it wasn't supposed to be Shawn, and he wound up getting in there. And then, of course, the matches with Undertaker, the years that followed, were just so incredible. It was hard not to like the guy. But, the screw job, and I'm a huge Bret Hart fan. Being a Canadian wrestling fan, especially in Montreal, I think it's hard not to be a huge Bret Hart fan. But I think it was his last run as a babyface, where he wasn't on top, where he wasn't, politicking his way to stay in the main event or stay world champion, where he was born again and a changed man. I think that's what really made me come around on Shawn Michaels. I actually was a Shawn Michaels fan growing up. I liked the sexy boy character. When he was with Sherry Martel and there was the whole Shawn Michaels has left the building gimmick, I was into that. It was just when he started feuding with Bret and when he screwed Bret where I kind of turned on Shawn. So I loved him, I hated him, and now I love him again.
If we go back to the present day, so let's start at the Royal Rumble. A very famous match for the Triple Threat and a very famous match for the wrong reason with the Royal Rumble itself. Let's just get your quick note and your quick take on the Triple Threat that will be remembered for the ages.
Well, the Triple Threat was unbelievable. I think it was really the coming out party for Seth Rollins. I was a critic of Seth Rollins. I didn't really see him as a main eventer, but he went in there, he held his own, he did some pretty unbelievable things in that match. He took a good beating from Brock Lesnar. That elbow drop from the top rope to the outside through the table on Brock, I thought was incredible. The guy's a tremendous athlete. Cena, I think, is fantastic. And Brock, I mean, what can we say about Brock? He's amazing. And those three guys had one of their best matches. For sure it was Seth Rollins' best match, and it was one of Cena's best matches and Brock's best matches. It was just everything that it should have been. It was perfect.
Roman Reigns became the winner of the Royal Rumble that night.
Yeah.
Even though things changed since then. What was your first take when you saw what happened in the ring?
I was disgusted. I mean, I think we were all disgusted.
Yeah.
Yep.
The guy, it does not belong in that position. Daniel Bryan is clearly the number one guy in professional wrestling, and for the WWE to screw it up for the second year in a row, I was not just shocked at how ignorant they could be and how foolish that they could be, not knowing that was going to be the reaction for Roman Reigns, especially in Philadelphia, but I was really disgusted with the idea that they weren't going to give Daniel Bryan the ball and let him run with it. It really makes me sick that in 2015, the WWE cannot figure out that Daniel Bryan is the wrestler for this generation, and Roman Reigns is nowhere near the man in 2015, and nowhere near the guy who should be wrestling Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. He doesn't deserve to be in that spot, and he's not entertaining enough to be there for me to want to watch him there.
Dave, I couldn't agree with you more. I have kind of a two-part question for you. The first part is, and they don't really intersect, so just bear with me. The first one is, with Fastlane coming up, I've been, especially on this show, I have been a big advocate, not to, use that word, but I've been a big advocate of, I think the February pay-per-views are a waste of time. And I think that they should be using the whole month of February to be keeping guys away from each other on Raw and building up to WrestleMania, obviously. Now, we're getting Cena and Rusev, which is probably going to be a rematch at WrestleMania. We're getting Ambrose and Barrett, which is probably going to be a rematch at WrestleMania. I find it kind of frustrating. Now with the whole Bryan versus Reigns match, I think it's kind of holding a little bit of weight and a little bit of water. I just want to get your thoughts on the thought of the February pay-per-view, and kind of for my second part question, news that broke today. Do you think if any 8-year-olds Google Seth Rollins that he'll be in trouble? And I'll
millennials, right, Vince? Am I right? Millennials. I mean, he's complaining about millennials not having any ambition. I think you should complain about millennials taking pictures of their erect penis and putting it out on the internet, Vince. Well, I mean, come on.
Unfortunately, Dave, my curiosity got the best of me today, and I had to. I just kind of had to Google it. Now, the NXT performer one, not so bad, but Seth Rollins. Sometimes you can't unsee things.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I said. And I take my job very seriously, so I had to see for myself, what the picture was about. And yes, I saw Seth Rollins nude today. It was not something that I enjoyed doing, but I had to do it because I have journalistic integrity, guys. All right?
Dave, you and I
terrible.
have that moment to share. You know what I mean? You and I are forever linked by the fact that you and I have seen Seth Rollins' penis.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Unbelievable.
The words of George Costanza comes to mind about shrinkage as well.
Yeah, there you go. And, I learned on Total Divas this week that Daniel Bryan pulls out, and then the next day we see Seth Rollins naked. I mean, what's next, guys?
I'm only shuddering to think, but I can only hope that it's with a diva. Anyways, Dave, just kind of to...
the February pay-per-view.
Yeah,
I think it's all right. I think that the Elimination Chamber was kind of a cool concept, and it does help to build WrestleMania. It is a long build from January to April. It's a long time to have no pay-per-view in between. And with this year, you've got Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns, which has the opportunity to right some of the wrongs that the WWE did at the Royal Rumble, and at the same time help build either Roman or Bryan for that match down the road with Brock Lesnar. I don't hate the idea of a February pay-per-view. I do think that it's just a little bit too long in between Mania and the Rumble, and it's just a little bit of a stop in between. I don't mind it. I like wrestling, and I think that this Fastlane this year is interesting, and the fact that Bryan and Roman are going to wrestle for a shot at Brock at WrestleMania, it's going to get a lot of people to tune in.
Quick prediction before we let you go, Dave. Who will be in the main event of WrestleMania this year?
Wow. It's tough. I think Roman is likely, but the WWE, they're getting it from too many angles right now. It's not just the fans, it's some of their former talent. It's, I think, some of the people within the company starting to tell them that Roman maybe can't do it alone or can't do it at all. So I'd be leaning towards Daniel Bryan getting in there somehow. I don't think we see a clean finish at Fastlane. I'm thinking we'll see another triple threat, Daniel Bryan, Roman Reigns, and Brock Lesnar. I don't think Daniel Bryan's going to win the championship at Mania, but I do think he's going to be in the main event, and he's going to make that match watchable, because Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar is not something I want to see. I don't know if you guys want to see that, but I would doubt it. I don't think anybody wants to see that. And, you know, Bryan can make a good match out of two broomsticks, and he doesn't have a broomstick with Brock Lesnar. He's got a great competitor there. So I think Bryan's got to be there just to make the main event watchable this year.
Can you let our listeners know where they can reach you and where they can listen to your show?
Yeah, for sure. TSN 690, that's 690 on your AM dial in Montreal. Every Friday and Saturday night. Friday, the MMA show, Ringside Report Radio, and a Saturday night, Wrestling Uncensored, both shows at midnight. And, of course, my website, www.ringsidereport.net. You can follow me on Twitter at Dave Simon MMA and all that other stuff. Ringside Report on Facebook. You know, we're all over the place. ringsidereport.net.
Thank you very much, Dave, and we'll get you back on the show eventually to talk about the whole drug situation in MMA. Lately, it's been becoming a really, really topic of the news lately.
Guys, it's been great talking to you. I love talking wrestling. You guys can call me anytime to talk MMA or wrestling. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Dave.
Have a great night, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
We thank you for listening to Down the Hour Wrestling Podcast with Robbie Mack and Kevin Laramie on Stitcher Radio. Stitcher Radio, the podcast application taken to the level of perfection. Subscribe to the show on Stitcher Radio. Listen to all the Off the Woodwork Studios family shows, but especially Down the Hour Wrestling Podcast, and that, my friends, is just perfect.